Hey, what's going on guys? Josh here from Moment Productions, and today we're going to be talking about the best camera settings for your gimbal. There are definitely some settings that you need to worry about, especially when it comes down to the overall cinematic quality and smoothness of your shots. First, let's talk about frame rate. Now, this is a very important topic because for gimbal shots, you can have slow motion, you can have real time, and there are just a few tweaks that you need to learn about before you start using your gimbal. Now, first of all, 24 frames is the cinematic standard. Why? Because we get that beautiful motion blur with fast moving objects. When we switch over to 30 frames or 60 frames per second, we lose a lot of that motion blur, and therefore it doesn't look as cinematic as possible. So remember that 24 frames is the cinematic standard, so consider using that when you're shooting with your gimbal. Now, I did a full tutorial / review video of comparing 24 and 30 frames per second. Definitely check it out right here. And I also made another video on comparing 60, 120, 24, and 30 frames per second. You can check out that video right here. I strongly suggest those videos, especially when you're new to using gimbals and your camera. So definitely check those out. Now, I'm a Sony Alpha user, which means that I'm not gonna get 4K 60 on my A7S or my A9. So I constantly need to switch between 24 frames per second, 60 frames per second, and 120 frames per second when I wanna get those slow motion shots. So remember that your main footage should be shot at 24 frames per second, and all of your beauty shots that need that slow motion should be shot at higher frame rates. So it's a good idea to make that a very quick option within your menu system, and that way you can switch between all of those frame rates pretty quickly and get the shots that you need. Next is IBIS, also known as Internal Body Image Stabilization. Now, this is very controversial, and I actually made a video just on this topic, so check it out right here. Now, it depends on your lens, it depends on your camera, but I've tested out a ton of cameras and different lenses on gimbals, and I did find out that when you're using wide angle lenses, let's say 16 to 24 millimeter, it's best to leave IBIS on. Now, when you start messing around with 35 millimeter, 50, 85, and so on, you wanna leave IBIS off. As you can see here, this is a pretty shallow shot using a narrow lens, and IBIS was turned on, and the shot did not come out as smooth as I expected. Definitely consider turning off IBIS when you're using a telephoto lens because it will become a lot more smoother of a shot. IBIS becomes very counterproductive when you are using telephoto glass because it tries to stabilize motion, but you're already using a gimbal and it already stabilizes that motion for you. So IBIS is trying to battle your gimbal, so keep IBIS off when you're using telephoto glass. Now, it's a little bit different when you're using wide angle glass. First of all, it's not as noticeable, and overall, the IBIS does a pretty decent job when stabilizing at wide angle lenses. Plus, when you're using wide angle lenses, it's a lot more difficult to see shakes and bumps in your footage. So remember, when you're shooting wide, turn on IBIS, and when you're shooting telephoto, turn off IBIS. Next up is focus. Now, a lot of our lenses are not compatible with our camera bodies, meaning that we have to use manual focus. Now, I did a few tutorials on focusing on a gimbal. You can actually find them right here, but I will make a much more in-depth tutorial on how to properly manually focus on a gimbal, so make sure you subscribe with those notifications turned on because that video will be coming out soon. But anyway, some of the best functions that your camera has is focus peaking and digital zoom. You can easily access both of these options within your camera menu, and make sure you enable that on your easy function buttons right on your camera body. But make sure that you're constantly checking focus because that can easily make or break your shot. Now, if you're using autofocus, it's definitely important to set your focus area. For me, when I'm using a wide angle lens, I like to keep my focus area at wide. When we want to focus on a subject's face, make sure that you use a targeted focus area, something that you can move around in your frame. That way your camera won't be hunting focus, it will stay locked onto a subject. That is very important because this will eliminate a lot of that focus hunting that we see in amateur videos. Lastly, we need to make sure that our cameras are properly communicating with our gimbals. Some of the newer age gimbals allow us to use the gimbal controls to control the camera settings, such as ISO, shutter speed, aperture, and recording. We can also enable USB charging, and that will allow us to have much longer run times on our cameras because we will be drawing a lot of power from the gimbal's battery. Now, to take full advantage of the Zhiyun crane system gimbals and DJI and Moza gimbals, make sure that your cameras are set to PC remote. For compatible gimbals such as the Zhiyun Crane 3 Lab and the Weeble Lab, we will be able to enable wireless HD transmission. And all we have to do is just set this setting here to PC remote. This will enable full functionality and communication between the gimbal and the camera. And it's as easy as that. Make sure you give this video a big like and subscribe with those notifications turned on, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace!